Welcome to the 10-Minute Bible Hour podcast. Right now, we're going through the entire Bible to understand it as one big, cohesive story. We're covering one book each day, and this one's about Obadiah.
I got a question for you. What is the most famous opening line of a fiction book that pops into your mind when I ask you that question? What do you got? I'm going to give you a couple seconds to think about it. Literally two. 1,000. 1,000. Did you come up with it was the best of times, it was the worst of times? I'm not kidding. I bet like half of you just said that out loud or mouthed it or thought it. I don't know that that's the right answer. I haven't done a scientific study or anything, but come on, everybody knows that one. It's by Charles Dickens from his book, A Tale of Two Cities, that dates to somewhere in the mid-1800s. And that book, I think, is in part so famous because it's so easy to understand what the exercise is going to be. You pick up a book, it says A Tale of Two Cities, and you think to yourself, well, I wonder if we're going to contrast two cities in here. And then you open it, and the first line is the best of times, it was the worst of times. And you're like, oh, I know exactly what the exercise is. And then you read on, and indeed, you're getting a contrast between French Revolution era Paris and the relative calm of that era that the people of London experienced just across the English Channel. Likewise, I think the premise of this little Old Testament prophetic book of Obadiah is just about as clear. It's a tale of two cities. It's a tale of two peoples. It's a contrast between two very closely related people groups who have a lot of backstory together, just like Paris and London do. And Christians reading the text believe that God is prompting Obadiah to weigh in on the relationship between these two cities, these two people groups. And at the most basic level, the issue between the two would seem to be that Jerusalem, during this little snapshot in time that Obadiah is speaking into, Jerusalem, the Israelites, the people of Judah, they're going through a really difficult time. They're in a downswing. And Edom, things are going pretty great over there. They're on an upswing. Good for them. And in a moment of trial and difficulty for the people of Judah and Jerusalem, Edom not only doesn't come to their aid, Edom seems to have helped out the other side and then gloated and reveled in the misery and the suffering of their neighbors. And if we look carefully enough back at history, their brethren, their cousins, because Edom and Israel are not just neighbors in the same way that the Moabites and the Ammonites and the Amalekites and the Jebusites, they all just come up and all the names might run together. But Edom stands out because they're family. Edom is descended from Esau, and of course Israel is descended from Jacob. Jacob and Esau were brothers. Their dad was Isaac, and Isaac's dad was Abraham, to whom God made this promise that there was going to be this great nation and that God was going to bless these people and that all the nations would be blessed through these people. I mean, that'd be a pretty exciting thing. You would want that kind of blessing for yourself. Well, 2 generations in, Jacob steals that blessing from Esau with some cleverness and some manipulation and some advantageous maneuvering. Jacob and Esau have a great big falling out, but eventually Esau's graciousness mollifies that tension between them. But over time, it looks like ensuing generations picked up that grudge and ran with it. And can you blame the Edomites? They look across the Dead Sea. Edom would be a little bit east and south of Jerusalem and Judah. The Edomites look across the Dead Sea, and every single time they see Judah enjoying wealth and success and evidence of the blessings of God, they're going to look at that and be like, that was supposed to be ours. Seriously, one brother outfoxes another brother, and now we're out here and they're over there. Should have been us. The Edomites can take a little bit of solace in that they live somewhere really cool. They're up in the mountains and the foothills. They've got that stylish mountain town vibe and mountain economy going. They get cool weather in the summers. They get to build really neat looking cities up there, and where they're situated proves to be to their benefit for their longevity. They're a less desirable target to attack than others. So Edom's doing all right for themselves, but there's a tension and a resentment that lasts for centuries. And because this is such a long-standing, tense relationship, it's really difficult to pin a date on the authorship of this book of Obadiah, because the book looks like it's flowing out of a moment of betrayal when Jerusalem gets attacked by some outside force And the feeling is our cousins should have showed up. Edom should have come to our aid, but instead, not only did Edom not come to our aid, they helped the invaders, but then they just laughed and ridiculed Jerusalem for the horrible things that she was going through. Well, that could really describe one of 4 times, and I don't want to go through all of them in detail, but the quick version is this. Egypt attacked Jerusalem in 926 BC. The Philistines attacked Jerusalem in the mid-800s BC. Israel, the northern kingdom, attacked Jerusalem in the southern kingdom around 790 BC. And then, of course, the big granddaddy of them all, Nebuchadnezzar from Babylon, finished his conquest of Jerusalem in 586 BC. So you can make a pretty strong case that Obadiah is being written during that second invasion, the one with the Philistines, or that last invasion, the one with Nebuchadnezzar. Either way, the tension between Israel and Edom's failure to have the back of their cousins is the motivation behind the book. Edom is characterized as gloating and delighted in their own power and all of their talent, and maybe feeling a little bit vindicated and everything, like, well, so much for this promise that Jacob ended up with. Maybe we didn't want that inheritance after all, if that's the way it's going to go. God's prophetic word through Obadiah seems to be checking exactly that attitude and saying, no, you're not going to escape judgment. So Obadiah overwhelmingly is an edict from God of judgment toward the people of Edom, contrasted with a brief statement of blessing about the reestablishment of the kingdom of Israel right at the end of this very little 1-chapter book. If we're going to continue with this metaphor of a tale of 2 cities, we have to acknowledge it's really imbalanced. Most of this book describes all of the things that Edom would be proud of. It uses a lot of metaphors for them living up in the mountains and imagining that there's security in that. It seems to acknowledge them smugly looking physically and metaphorically down on their cousins in Judah. But then the oracle of judgment says all those things that you are proud of, they're not going to save you. God is going to bring judgment against you, and you will be straight up done, ransacked, pillaged, forced to the border, overpowered, trapped, cut down in the slaughter. This is the kind of language that is used in verses 6 through 9. Verse 10 says, because of the violence against your brother Jacob, you will be covered with shame. You will be destroyed forever. And then pretty close to the middle of the book, we get another nod to this theme, this motif that keeps coming up in so many of these minor prophets about the day of the Lord. In verse 15, it says, the day of the Lord is near for all nations. As you have done, it will be done to you. Your deeds will return upon your own head. Aha! So this Obadiah getting after Edom thing isn't just for Edom, but much like what we read in the prophet Joel, there's this day of the Lord idea, and this judgment is coming to bring to their knees all of the haughty nations of the world. And then after that one pivot verse about the day of the Lord, then the rest of this little book of Obadiah focuses on the other city, the city that's built on a different mountain, Mount Zion. Just as you drank on my holy hill, so all the nations will drink continually. They will drink and drink and be as if they had never been. But on Mount Zion will be deliverance. It will be holy, and the house of Jacob will possess its inheritance. The house of Jacob will be a fire, and the house of Joseph a flame. The house of Esau will be stubble, and they will set it on fire and consume it. There will be no survivors from the house of Esau. The Lord has spoken. And then the last few verses describe the geography of God's kingdom through his chosen people, expanding to cover all of this area, including the mountains of Esau. And then the closing line is, and the kingdom will be the Lord's. So to you and me reading this way after the fact, it looks like God getting after one more of Israel's neighbors and promising one more time deliverance and the advent of this kingdom and all of that. And it is, and that's great. But to the original audience, especially after some of these things actually came to pass and played out, this is going to read more like God's final word on a centuries-old rivalry that might have come to look like it was 50-50, just imbalance. And one side gets the upper hand for a while, the other side gets the upper hand for a while, just like any old-fashioned rivalry. But then God weighs in and is like, it's not really like that. I'm going to prop up my people, I'm going to punish my enemies, and I'm going to establish my eternal kingdom. When you visualize the book of Obadiah, picture a tale of 2 cities, but the 2 cities are crowning 2 rival mountains. When you think about the theme of Obadiah, reflect on the judgment of Edom and the establishment of God's kingdom. And if you don't have time to read the whole thing, then I am personally very concerned about your level of busyness. You need to give yourself a break. You're working hard. You're doing your best. It's okay to take a minute to do something else. Jonah, next time around. I'm Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour Podcast. Let's do this again soon.
This podcast is supported by many of you at patreon.com/the TMBH podcast. We're grateful because it supports our family.